had objected to Councillor Hughes's suggestion that condition 5 regarding a bollard management plan be reflected in an amended condition. We haven't yet voted on the recommendation.
Okay, thank you very much. So on the main recommendation, is there anybody against the main recommendation, please? In the chamber, is anybody against? I can't see in the chamber, obviously. I think not.
There are no objections in the chamber, Councillor.
Okay, so in that case, the main motion is passed then, please. Thank you very much. With that, I will hand back over to the chair.
We're just going to bring the chair back in now under Councillor Clark.
Thank you very much.
Right, thank you for that. So we'll now go on to P23 308 BC Ysgol Castell, and we've got a public speaker, Mr. Chris Owen, 99 Davis Avenue. Yep, Mr. Davis. The clock will start when you start, Mr. Davis.
Yeah, it's Mr. Owen.
Oh, sorry,
I
Mr.
live
Owen,
in Davis Avenue. And It's very confusing. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and to the committee for inviting me to speak. I'm generally supportive of this this application, but I have two concerns. One is about parking, and the other is about light pollution. And I have another comment on the fact that apparently they're replacement lights in the area, but as far as I can see, they're new lights, but I may be wrong about that. So firstly, about the parking then, there have been problems in Ogmore Terrace and on the corner of Ogmore Terrace and Davis Avenue with when events go on the AstroTurf area, the current area, there have been problems with parking on the pavement and by the junction, and councillors have been helpful in trying to resolve some of those, but they do persist from time to time. And I'm just concerned that if there's another area there that something needs to be done about the parking and extra facilities. I think there used to be a facility at Ysgol Bryn Castell itself, but that's been blocked off, and I think something needs to be done about the parking aspect of the new proposal. Ogmore Terrace is on a Sunday when many of these activities take place, is on the bus route of the 172 currently, and so I think if it's passed, extra provision should be made for parking. My second concern is about light pollution for the residents, and particularly I think bat foraging is mentioned in the submissions, and I think there should be a curfew at night on the use of the facility, say perhaps at 10 o'clock, and there might possibly need to be one in the morning as well. And light pollution should be considered when there are other applications in the area, because the bats often forage to the down Ogmore Terrace and to the area, the Greenfield area down there, as well as to the rugby field. So those are my two concerns about parking and light pollution, and I would ask the councillors to make some provision for those concerns.
Okay. Have you finished now?
I've finished now, yes. Yes, thank you.
Okay, thank you very much for that. Gillian's now going to read out the statement on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you, Chair. For the purpose of the recording, I'm Gillian Dawson, solicitor and legal advisor to the Chair and the DC Planning Committee. I'm asked to read this statement on behalf of the applicant in respect of this application P23380 full. We request that the below be read in response to any public objection that is raised at the meeting in regard to the identified application. We also send apologies that the relevant officer is unable to attend in person. The former Ogmore Comprehensive School site, that today is now the Ysgol Bryn Castell site, has a long-standing history of supporting community access to the on-site sports facilities. In more recent years, there has been additional residential development on the former fields of the school and the adjacent areas, and it is recognised that considerations in the interest of the residential amenities of the area are required when any new or additional developments are to be considered. This application is to enhance usage of the school yard space that has been in situ since the establishment of schools at the site. The resurfacing of the yard was conducted by the council for the benefit of pupils attending Ysgol Bryn Castell, and with the potential to provide added value to after-school activity programmes and a measured amount of community use. Ysgol Bryn Castell is a community day special school, providing education for pupils aged 7 to 19 years with complex behavioural, emotional and social difficulties. The access to external space that can help pupils to meet needs is important to the school. The use of the yard space hard court area is currently usable by school and community during daylight hours, but this specific application is for an additional floodlighting scheme. Developing social and community infrastructure is a key policy, policy SP9, covered within the replacement local development plan, highlighting the importance of social and community facilities to well-being of communities. This includes protecting and enhancing social and community uses and facilities, such as schools. Policy SP9 encourages, wherever practicable, the combining of social and community uses in one location. And this policy also highlights the Council's aspirations for community-focused schools as part of school modernisation programmes. The proposed scheme is for an area that is 2 netball courts in size and will be located adjacent to the existing sports pitch. The need to meet the interests of residential amenities will see restrictions on the hours that the floodlights can be used. There are also restrictions on weekends where the floodlighting for the additional courts would not be used. The use of floodlighting would not be required during those periods of the year when daylight hours are longer and would only be brought into use during a number of the winter months. The creation of access to hard court facilities will benefit certain sports and help promote gender equality opportunities. The usage is not planned to increase in terms of high volumes due to the small area, about 25% of the yard space that would be developed. The access for usage of this sports area will be via the main school entrance, where there are adequate parking bays adjacent to the changing facilities. The application has been modified, having considered policy SP3 and DNP9 of the Local Development Plan 2018 to 2033. The original proposed lighting scheme now fully recognises both residential amenity issues and also ecological considerations. The column height are 8 metres as opposed to larger columns seen on other sites, and the original 8 columns have been reduced to 6. The light fittings now specified have a 30-degree tilt capacity, and they are fitted with integral maximum cutout louvers to ensure that light is guided on the areas intended. The units have a higher technical capacity to focus the light as required than would normally be specified due to the LED bulbs within the fitting, and will be programmed and set professionally to meet requirements.
Time's up. So
One paragraph left regarding technicalities.
yeah. Thank you, Gillian, for that.
There's one last sentence which could be.
Go on, to read the last sentence of it.
One last sentence in summary: for reassurance, technical solutions can be put in place to ensure the lighting does not operate beyond set timings.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you, Gillian. Okay. Dion?
Thank you, Chair, and good afternoon, councillors. For the purposes of this recording, my name is Dion Douglas. I'm a senior planner and the reporting officer on this application. Much of what I'm about to say has actually been said already, so hopefully I can quickly skim through it. The proposal involves the erection of 6 LED lights on 8-metre high columns, illuminating the far end of the hard court at the rear of the school campus. The proposal is required to light an area of 2 netball courts and would be used for evening training. As mentioned, there's an existing artificial pitch which has been in place for about 20 years. That's got 12-metre high floodlight poles, and the artificial pitch isn't accessed through the school but from the adjoining road. Turning to the current proposal, 2 objections were received from nearby residents. Concerns raised included the existing light pollution, cumulative impact of additional light pollution, overlooking of residential properties and impact on privacy, the use of the existing artificial pitch car park and spillover onto the highway. It was considered that additional parking was going to be required, and a suggestion that the proposed lights be turned off at 10 p.m. The key issues for consideration are the principle of the use, the visual impact of the proposal, the effects on residential amenity, impacts on biodiversity, and highways effects. I consider the principle of recreation and educational use of the site as well established. It should be noted that the hard court area and artificial pitch were developed prior to the development of the adjoining housing estate. These dwellings are sited well away from the school boundary, and a dense planting buffer has been established. And there's photos appended to my report which show this. The visual impact of 6 8-metre high poles is considered to be minor. They would have a similar appearance to standard street lights, and they're well distanced from any residential properties and well screened by existing boundary planting. No objections have been raised over the proposal by colleagues and the Shed Regulatory Services team. They recommended the imposition of restrictions on the use of the illuminated courts to mitigate any adverse amenity effects on residential neighbours. A condition is recommended to ensure the floodlights are switched off at 9 p.m. and can only be used on weekdays, Monday to Friday, and not on weekends or bank holidays. And a further condition is recommended to ensure the lights are not used during the months when bats will be present and foraging, that being May through to the end of September. As mentioned previously, the specific lighting has been chosen following recommendations from the applicant's ecologist to ensure that the lights will not adversely impact on any foraging bats. 2 bat boxes have been recommended as a condition of consent to enhance biodiversity outcomes of this proposal. In terms of highways effects, the applicant has advised that users of the hard court will use the main school car park during evening hours, which contains more than adequate parking for visitors. Accordingly, there should be no impact on car parking demand on local roads. In summary, the proposal is considered to be supported by relevant legislation and the policies of the replacement LDP. The use is considered to positively contribute to the health and well-being of school pupils and other members of the community. Accordingly, the application is recommended for approval subject to the imposition of appropriate conditions of consent. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. You can see the recommendation on page 104. Recommendation is to be granted with conditions. Can somebody formally move?
Yes, I move.
Second? Thank you. Any questions, please, for the officer? Councillor Hughes?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. It's just picking up on the comment on page 98 from St Bride's Minor Community Council, where they raise an issue with the BAT survey being carried out in September, which is sort of the very end of the season, and for works of this nature, which are sort of, lighting works especially, I think it's reasonable to expect such surveys to be carried out earlier in the season, from May perhaps on to August. I can see in mitigation that that this issue has been addressed by the officers. I'm grateful for that, and I'm quite satisfied that the protection is there for wildlife and bats. But perhaps it would be useful to have on note a response to St Bride's Minor's assertion that the survey shouldn't be carried out in September.
Yeah, Dion?
From memory, the ecological report was really looking for the presence of bat roosts in the area. Obviously, the introduction of floodlights wasn't going to disturb any existing building and wasn't going to result in the loss of any trees. So the ecological report was really looking for the presence of roosts rather than the presence of bats. I think it's openly acknowledged that bats use the area and pass through the area and forage in the area, and they obviously take advantage of the more mature woodland beside the hard stand. So undertaking a bat survey during summertime would indicate the presence of bats, and obviously they've taken that into account, that it's a foraging area, and they've designed the floodlights accordingly to try and not disrupt foraging bats.
Happy with that?
Yeah. On the window opportunity for bat surveys, it can extend beyond September, actually, depending on the temperatures. So it can, September is normally noted as being the sort of end of the window, but anywhere between May and September. In actual fact, most surveys, they're not better off done early on in the period. So early May sometimes isn't the best time to do it, but they did hit the right sort of window of opportunity on this one, and obviously if we had concerns about that timing of the survey, then our ecologists would have raised it as an issue as well. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. I'm glad that's acknowledged, and the comment made by the Community Council, perhaps we can report back to them that this has been taken into account.
I'm sure Dion has heard your comments, and I'm sure a letter could be sent back to him explaining the reasons why.
That would be good.
Okay.
Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor John, please.
Thank you, Chair. A little bit of confusion I've got at the moment with this. Plans were drawn up on the 7th of December 2022 by the lighting consultants James and Nicholas for replacement lights. Now, I went to school there, and there's no replacement. These are new lights as far as I can see, no replacement. Can you shed some light on that for me, please?
Yes, I can ask Dion.
You're quite correct. There's no existing lights on the hard stand, but I think there could have been an element of confusion in the mind of the person that drafted the application, because they were thinking of the existing floodlights on the artificial pitch. So these floodlights aren't replacing those. These floodlights are brand new.
Does that answer your query, Councillor John?
It does. If you can indulge me in the second part of the question, please, Chair, I'd be appreciative.
Okay, thank you for that.
Yeah, no, when Dion said about the tree planting as a buffer, which is shown there just to the north of the Mugger, obviously these lights are going to be used predominantly in the winter. Well, with deciduous trees, obviously there's no leaf cover in the winter, so it's not really much of a barrier. Would you suggest different? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. Dion?
Well, those trees are probably only something in the order of about 10 years old. And I must acknowledge that when I did visit the property, obviously a couple of months ago, they weren't in full leaf, and it's probably a bit of a different situation now. But I suppose the flip side is that they do provide an element of screening or softening of the visual impact. There could be light that shines through the trees in the winter months, but obviously we're looking to impose conditions to restrict the use of the lights to no later than 9 p.m, which is not a bad hour of the evening to switch the lights off. And the other thing is that each of the floodlights is quite well cowled or screened, so that any light is directed down at the hard surface. So the intention isn't to floodlight the whole neighbourhood. It's really just to floodlight the playing area.
Okay, Councillor John?
Yeah, thanks very much for that. The one thing that I am pleased about, how it's going to be pleased, I don't know, is the extra parking on the school grounds, but how that's going to be pleased, because the road traffic parking is absolutely abysmal. But thank you for that, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, thanks to Councillor John. That's added me on quite nicely to my question. So the additional parking will be sufficient in the officer's mind. Is that just the parking on site, or is that including residential streets as well? My question, if there is, in this council's opinion, sufficient parking to try and prevent people parking in residential streets, could we offer a recommendation or a suggestion that there is a sign built that there is parking on site rather than just people parking in residential streets and then walking to this, so that there is some sort of advert by a sign that says there is sufficient parking on site, so they're not using, ultimately we've got no control over it, but it's a nice suggestion, I would have thought. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah.
I second that as an amendment. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Dion?
In this particular case, obviously, the access to the illuminated courts is through the school. So if you're arriving by car, you're going to drive into the car park in front of the school, walk through the school campus to actually get to the illuminated court. So I can't actually imagine that anybody would be parking on residential streets or the industrial area if they were going to use the courts in the evening. We're only looking at a very small number of people in reality anyway. So the applicant sort of surmises something in the order of 36 participants. So,
just for clarification, Rob, do you want to come in from a highways perspective?
Thank you, Councillor. Thank you, Chair. For the purposes of the recording, I'm Rob Morgan. I'm the Principal Officer, Highways Development Control. From our perspective, we've considered this as purely an application for lighting of an existing facility, and accordingly we've not considered any requirement for parking as the facility is already there.
Okay.
I'll come in on that.
Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Just to sort of reiterate what Rob has said, basically, the facility is already in use. So we are only considering the lighting of that facility. So I think it would be difficult to add any conditions that would go beyond the impacts of the lighting. But I take on board what you say. But I think the potential, perhaps what members may be concerned with, the potential of having lights would make that facility more attractive and more in more use. But I think that sort of uplift will be very marginal compared to the overall use, which would be predominantly during the
the sort of hours of daylight during the school operation times and into the early evening. However, the conditions would specifically restrict access late into the evening on lights alone. Yeah, if there are pre-existing parking issues, there's not much we can do with that particular problem through this planning consent. But I take on board the comments that have been made. Thank you, Chair.
Okay, thank you for that. Well, I can't see anybody else making any comments. Are we? Let's do it the other way then. Is there anybody against the officer's recommendation? No? Passed unanimously then. Thank you very much. We will now go on to number 4, Park Street, Bridgend. Lee? Oh, Dion, sorry. Dion?
Thank you. This recording. My name is Dion Douglas and I'm Senior Planner here at Bridgend Council. This proposal involves the reuse of a vacant premises at 14 Park Street into a 6-bedroom HMO with shared facilities. Existing parking for 2 vehicles would be retained at the rear of the property for residents. Additionally, there would be space available in the rear of the building for outdoor storage of recycling and refuse, cycle parking and clothes drying facilities in a manner similar to the adjoining HMO at number 12. Little amenity space would remain at the rear of the property. However, outdoor space is available at the front of the site for the use of future residents. I've been advised that the property is currently vacant and has been actively marketed for sale since September 2022. My report was previously presented to the committee on the 4th of April with a positive recommendation. However, at that meeting, members voted against the recommendation and subsequently draft reasons for refusal have been prepared for further consideration by this committee. These are summarised as: reason 1, the change of use would represent an over-intensification of similar housing types and would have a detrimental impact on residential amenities of neighbouring occupiers and would result in an increased perception of crime and instances of antisocial behaviour. Reason 2, insufficient and accessible on-site parking, which would have a detrimental impact on the congested on-street parking resource. And reason 3, insufficient and usable outdoor amenity space and adequate storage for recycling refuge, cycle parking and a clothes drying area. In response to these draft reasons, I would further advise, in terms of reason 1, over-intensification and fear of crime, council officers have further considered these matters, particularly the new policy COM7 houses and multiple occupation of the replacement LDP. Feedback was received from the planning policy team and it also assisted and clarified the background to this policy. It should be emphasised that this policy relates only to houses in multiple occupation, bedsits and other forms of shared housing. Since the last meeting, council officers were able to confirm that the authorised use of number 11 Park Street, the former Taffy's Tavern, is for short-term living accommodation, and that's use class C6. Use class C6 covers commercial short-term letting, not longer than 31 days for each period of occupation. This form of accommodation falls outside that which is to be considered under policy COM7. Accordingly, and for this reason, it has been established that only one other HMO or form of shared housing exists within a 50-metre radius of the application property, that being number 12 Park Street. Accordingly, the current application is considered to be policy compliant with criteria 1 of policy CIM7, as the proposed HMO would result in a total of only 2 instances of shared housing in a location where the 10% threshold would permit 2.9. While concerns regarding a fear of crime are acknowledged in this instance, case law has provided guidance on a number of criteria which must be overcome before a fear of crime can be regarded as a material planning consideration. This includes evidence that the fear of crime must relate to the use in planning terms of the land in question rather than assumptions. Council officers consider that no clear evidence has been presented which would establish that the proposed change of use of this application property, number 14 Park Street, would result in an increase in crime or antisocial behaviour in the neighbourhood. Turning to reason 2, which is parking, Council's Highways Officer has reaffirmed that there is no category in the Parking Standards SPG to cover HMOs. Advice continues to indicate that car ownership levels are likely to be lower given the location and nature of this form of accommodation. Furthermore, the property is located in a highly sustainable location, close to public transport, and on-site cycle parking can be provided at the rear of the property. Turning to reason 3, outdoor amenity and storage, Council officers maintain that the property would retain an adequate rear yard area suitable for storage of recycling refuge and cycle parking. Space would also be available for the drying of clothes. While this area would not be regarded as being an ideal location for outdoor amenity space, it should be noted that the property benefits from a modest south-facing area looking out over Park Street. This amenity space would provide both a garden area and a space for sitting out, as seen on other similar residential properties fronting Park Street. It is considered that this space would provide an external amenity space of an adequate standard of residential amenity for the future occupiers of the property. Those are my further submissions on the proposal. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you for that. You can, page 70, you can see the officer's recommendation. Can somebody formally move? Thank you. Seconded. Thank you. Okay, we've got Councillor Clark first.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I would like to thank Jonathan for taking the time to meet with Councillor Della Hughes and myself, and for the information that he provided in order to compile a refusal. Also, thanks to other officers that provided me with the LDP, parking standards, etc. And of course, my thanks to Councillor Della Hughes for her help and support. On April the 4th, when this application was refused by this committee, the task fell to me to put together the reasons for refusal. May I say, not an easy task, which took a considerable amount of time. So I cannot even begin to tell committee how very disappointed I was to find that after sending in my reasons for refusal, based on the report that came before us on April the 4th, to then read in the new report that 11 Park Street was now no longer a HMO, as reported initially, but a property of short-term lets with stays of less than 31 days that fell into a different class. Anyway, here we are again today deciding on this particular application. The policy that covers HMOs is policy COM7, which contains 6 criteria. COM7 states proposals to convert an existing building into a HMO, bed sits, or other forms of shared accommodation housing will only, I've jumped too far on my, will only be permitted within defined settlement boundaries if the criteria within the policy are adhered to. I believe that as a committee, we should consider the following criteria within that policy. Obviously, I think members have to note now that because of the reduction in the HMO, that we can't decide on the 10% because it doesn't apply anymore. So COM7 at criterion 4 states the proposal incorporates an on-site parking provision or demonstrates that it will not have an adverse effect on local parking provision. Dion did mention when he read out his report that the 2 parking spaces at the rear, were now for residents. But on April the 4th, those 2 parking spaces were for staff and visitors. So all of a sudden now they've become parking spaces for residents. COM7 is criterion 4. Oh, I've mentioned that. In the report before us today, the Highways Officer has reaffirmed there is no category in the parking standards SPG 17 for HMOs. There may not be a specific category for HMOs, but parking standards still applies to this development. 5.2.76 of parking standards states, the adopting parking standards SPG seeks to ensure a transparent and consistent approach to the provision of parking. Therefore, this application should be afforded that transparent and consistent approach. Parking for this development should provide the number of parking spaces that are appropriate to any 6-bedroom property. 5.2.77 of parking standards state, on-street parking can cause problems by reducing road width, thereby affecting the free flow of traffic and adding hazards for pedestrians, cyclists and other road users. Therefore, applications will be refused where there is a likelihood of on-street parking occurring that will give rise to these concerns. In some circumstances, this can also impact on the amenity of residents who have to compete for a car parking space. Policy COM7 5.3.43 states proposal should consider provision of on-site car parking or otherwise demonstrate that conversion to an HMO would not adversely impact upon local parking provision. There are only 2 parking spaces at the rear of 14 Park Street, which are allocated, as I've mentioned before, for visitors and staff, or they were in the April the 4th report. I visited Kydra Street at 8:47 a.m. on April the 15th and took photos of the vehicles in the street, which can be seen on page 80, and I don't know whether that can be brought up for members to see. So that was the parking in the street early on April the 15th. That's further down. It'll probably be in the appendix, I don't know. Well, anyway, the photos on page 79 show the vehicles parked in the lane directly behind properties 10, 12, 14 and 16 Park Street. The bottom photo on that page shows the rear of 14 Park Street, which is the white building on the left, furthest away next to the brown building, which is the dentist's practice. There were 17 vehicles altogether within those 2 photos on page 79, all parked in the rear lane. I also visited the rear of the properties on the 23rd of April, when there were 19 vehicles parked in the rear lane, and Kydra Street was full of traffic, of vehicles. I also visited yesterday. Excuse me, I keep dropping away from my. Missed it now. Yes, I visited again yesterday when there were 14 vehicles parked in the rear lane, and Kydra Street was full of vehicles. Parking standards states that visitor parking must be designed as an integral part of any development where it is required and must take into account the needs of disabled. The rear entrance of 14 Park Street is at a lower level than the parking area and is not disabled compliant. That photo is on page 81. And parking standards always state also states all development must be served by appropriate levels of parking in accordance with the adopted SPG on parking standards. The application is for a 6-bedroom property that is covered by policy COM7, criterion 4, which is to incorporate on-site parking and is also covered by parking standards, which is to ensure that there is a transparent and consistent approach to the provision of parking. I do not believe that evidence has been provided to show that this development will not cause an adverse effect on the local parking provision in the area. It is clear that parking standards cannot be adhered to for this development. The 2 parking spaces at the rear are not DDA compliant, and due to the lack of available on-site parking this development requires, it will certainly have an adverse effect and impact on the local parking provision, which could lead to competition for on-street parking in Cydres Street. Therefore, this proposed development does not comply with COM7 criterion 4. The next criterion that applies to this application is number 5 of policy COM7, which reads, the proposal includes adequate storage for recycling and refuse, cycle and a clothes drying area. If I could quote from the report that was before us on April the 4th, there would be a shared outdoor amenity space courtyard to the rear and side of the property. And with regard to outdoor amenity space, the proposed layout provides an outdoor space to the rear that future occupiers could use. This space is also well overlooked, providing a safe environment for occupiers, which will benefit their health and well-being. The report before us today states something totally different, in that the property contains a modest yard area. Please see the photo on page 81, which is considered to be sufficient for the storage of waste, recycling, and 2 cycle stands, and further space remains at the rear of the property for the provision of a clothes drying area. I'm not quite sure where that further space is at the rear for the provision of a clothes drying area, or whether even if you put clothes to dry there, that it would dry. It also states in today's report that town centre dwellings do not generally benefit from extensive amenity space. So in the space of 5 weeks, information regarding the outdoor area at the rear has gone from there would be an outdoor amenity space courtyard to the rear that future occupiers could use, to town centre dwellings do not generally benefit from extensive amenity space. The proposed development has very limited outdoor space at the rear and is definitely not sufficient for waste recycling, 2 cycle stands, and certainly no space for a closed drying area, and is totally inadequate for a 6-bedroom development and is contrary to policy COM7 criterion 5. Nearly finished. The last criterion of the policy, COM7, is criterion 6. The proposed development would not have an unacceptable adverse impact on residential amenity. Definition of amenity: a feature or service that makes a place pleasant, comfortable, or easy to live in. I met with some residents of Cydres Street, and I have included extracts from the letters that they gave to me, which describes the nightmare that they are living through since 12 Park Street became a HMO. You'll find the extracts on page 75 to 77. I do hope that members have taken the time to read them, as it gives a good indication of the genuine perceived fear of crime and personal safety that residents have regarding the possibility of another HMO being placed in close proximity to them, and indeed next door to an existing HMO. One household has been burgled whilst the occupants were upstairs in their property. A handbag, purse, a set of house keys and a passport were stolen, which resulted in an arrest. Residents have been threatened with physical violence. They have witnessed drug overdoses, drug taking, alcohol misuse, people blatantly selling drugs in broad daylight, shouting and abusive language, and fighting. Some residents state that their children are scared and do not feel safe. Loud music playing into the early hours of the morning. The dentist at 16 Park Street has had his staff verbally abused and sexual comments made to his nurses. His toilets have been used for injecting drugs, and needles have been found in the car park. It's so easy to say that these matters are police matters, But when you are living in an environment where antisocial behaviour is happening day in and day out, the perceived fear of crime and personal safety becomes a reality. We were told at the last meeting that COM7 is a new policy that has been introduced into the new replacement local development plan. So it was certainly deemed very important this policy was included. Policy COM7 has 6 criteria, 3 of which I have outlined, which are out of accord with this new policy. As a committee, we have to do what we believe is the correct thing to do. The residents living close to the established HMO are living a nightmare. No one should have to put up with what they are putting up with day and night. They truly believe that an additional HMO sited adjacent to the existing HMO at 12 Park Street will cause more disruption in their lives. I therefore ask members to consider the reasons for refusal, which are that development does not comply with the parking standards of this authority. The proposal doesn't incorporate adequate on-site parking provision for a 6-bedded property, and it hasn't been demonstrated that it will not have an adverse effect on local parking provision, and is contrary to policy COM7 criterion 4. The proposal doesn't include adequate storage for recycling, refuse, cycles, and a closed drying area, and is contrary to policy COM7 criterion 5. The proposed development would have an unacceptable adverse impact on residential amenity, perceived fear of crime, and is contrary to policy COM7 criterion 6. COM7 is a new policy that was thought to be essential and was included in the newly adopted LDP, which was only approved by this council in March this year. If this application is approved today, it is not only contrary to policy COM7, it will be setting a very early precedent, which is out of accord with the newly adopted LDP. This application is out of accord with policy and the local development plan. I therefore propose that this planning application is refused. Thank you for your time, everyone.
Thank you for that refusal for this application. I'll go now to Stephen Easterbrook.
Okay, thank you, Chair. For the record, my name is Stephen Easterbrook, Councillor Stephen Easterbrook. I'm the ward member for Bridgend Central. As a member of the Development Control Committee, I've not participated in any discussions to this point. I have an apology to make that I didn't attend the last meeting as my wife had a stroke and was in hospital. So I've got up to speed within the last couple of days and certainly read the report. I have a couple of points. I have visited a D2 property with the applicant. They do make a very nice property for potential residents to go into. So that's not something particularly that I'm picking up on. It's more of the comments that residents have made to Councillor Nora Clark. There's something that I'd like to read from a .Wales document and also to find out really if it's current today. It says the Housing in Multiple Occupation Review and Evidence Gathering Report found that although the actual proportions of HMOs at ward level are relatively low, compared to the areas within some other towns and cities in Wales, there are local concentrations within the wards at street level. To enable HMO developments to take place so that smaller, more affordable units of accommodation can continue to be provided, whilst at the same time trying to avoid over-concentrations of HMOs, the Council will seek to ensure that proposals for new HMOs do not result in the number of buildings in use, a HMO exceeding 10%, rounded to the nearest whole number. In the video of the last meeting, there was lots of talks as to whether it's 2.9 and all that type of thing. The word in there actually does round it up to 3. 3 actually takes it to 10.34%, which is over the 10%. So we have to establish that if we are going to round it up, then we need to take on board the 10.34%. It says within a 50-mile radius of the boundaries of the application site, where concentration exceeds 10%, planning permission will not normally be granted unless there are relevant material planning considerations to justify doing so. I think Councillor Clark and the others that chose democratically to vote against this proposal were asked for material reasons why, because that would be the legal thing in planning. But this piece of information says it'll not normally be granted unless there are relevant material planning considerations to justify doing so. So I would ask the officers in the same breath, what are the material reasons that you think this should continue? And what material reasons? Because you've asked Councillor Clark for them. So on the other hand, it would be good for residents of Bridgend Central, certainly Kidray Street, to ask the officers for material reasons why this should go ahead. One other point that the houses within that area of Park Street can range from a very small little terraced cottage, terraced house, all the way through to some very large properties. So the 29 properties that we're talking about within that 50-yard radius, if there were a lot more smaller properties at street level, then it would be more than 29. So what we're talking about is this particular proposal. And so also in the same document that I'm looking at, it says, in addition to complying with the above requirements of an HMO, to avoid concentration of HMOs developing with individual streets, there will normally be a requirement for a gap of at least 2 dwellings or other buildings not in use as a HMO between the proposed HMO and any existing HMOs. So I would ask, how close is number 14 to the current HMO of number 12?
Right, okay. Have you finished now?
I have, yeah.
Right, okay.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, that's a factual question. Do you want to answer that?
Can I just go back to the 10%? As we've established, there's currently one HMO within 50 metres. This current application means that there'd be 2. And what we've established is that the threshold of 10% is 2.9. So this application complies with that 10% criteria.
I'm not aware of any changes of the over.
Can you use your mic? Because everybody else can't hear you online. Sorry.
Sorry, Chair.
No,
but I wasn't aware of that until I sort of heard of that today and sort of read it in the report. But it seems to be that we are sort of playing around with 0.1 and we're rounding up and rounding down and that type of thing. But also, if we can't accept that, then is it lawful to put a HMO next to a current HMO? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you.
Do you want to come in on that then, Chair?
Well, you answer that one, then we'll go back to Richard, yeah.
Okay. And under terms of our current policy, yes, there isn't any sort of bar on that. But and again, going back to the 10% issue, I think we shouldn't get too bogged down on percentages and numbers and percentages of fractions of percentages, etc. I think the important thing here is to focus on the impacts of the development, and those have been quite eloquently presented to the committee by Councillor Clark, and she has emphasised the points that she raised in her report, which has been reproduced in the main agenda report. So I think the focus should be, it's not planning isn't always black and white, and if something's above 10% or something's below 10% necessarily, that doesn't necessarily make it acceptable or unacceptable. It's demonstrating the harm of a proposal. That's the important thing, and Councillor Clark has raised a number of issues here, which can be considered material planning considerations that would back up the reasons for refusal. So I wouldn't get too tied up in that 10% argument, because if it's over 10%, it doesn't automatically make it unacceptable. It's the harm that would cause the amenity of the area. Thank you, Chair.
Yeah. Councillor Richard Williams, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to remind committee that I declared an interest in the first hearing of this application, and it's a personal interest, as one of the objectors is known to me. I just wanted to remind the committee that I won't be voting on this one. Okay, thanks.
Councillor Williams, can you just leave the meeting then, please, as you did in the first one, and we'll get...
Yeah.
Oh, he didn't. No, he should have left.
No, yes.
Is it personal or prejudicial?
Personal. I don't think it's prejudicial.
Do you tell him?
There's two aspects. One, if a declaration is of a personal interest, or if it's personal and prejudicial. If it's only personal, but there is no prejudicial aspect, then you can stay in the meeting. But if you consider it prejudicial in that it, whatever your interest is, could be reflected in your decision, then you would have to leave the meeting. So is it purely personal?
It's purely personal, yes.
Okay.
Not prejudicial at all, I don't think.
Thank you for your confirmation.
All right, thanks.
No.
Oh, no. So you can stay there then, Richard.
Thank you.
Fine, you've given the legal advice. I'm going on your advice here. Okay, Councillor Griffiths, please. Simon? You're on mute, Simon.
Thank you, Chair. I just want to get to the facts of this on the numbers, as I did last time, I think, in the first hearing of this. And just to be clarified that in the original proposal, there were identified 2 existing HMOs within 50 meters, and now we are saying that there's only 1. So in effect, we've clarified the classification of 1 building. If you could confirm that's the case, please.
Dion?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you.
So say that to Councillor Griffiths again, and for the committee.
Just to clarify, initially I identified 2 existing properties as being HMOs, or shared living accommodation. On reflection and further discussion with other officers who were involved with the former Taffy's Tavern, it clarified that it was short-term living accommodation, more akin to Airbnb, people coming and staying for a short period of time, no more than 31 days. So the current situation is we only have 1 HMO within the locality, the 50-metre locality, and that's the property immediately adjoining the application site.
Okay, thank you. And if I may ask also for the COM7 criteria to be put up again on the screen as they were earlier, which was very helpful.
Rod? Yeah, it's coming now, Simon.
Thank you very much. So when we read through these, I'm listening to the councillor's submissions earlier. What we're saying now, I guess, is number one, it isn't a criteria because of that reclassification. But I think, taking Jonathan's comments in mind, number 5 and number 6 do become problematic for us, and number 5 especially because I've just had a look on Google Maps again, and I've looked at the submission, and there seems to be no place for adequate refuse cycles or a external closed drying area. And we're also talking about the unacceptable adverse impact, and we've seen that adverse impact of an additional HMO. So I think from my perspective, I think we have to look at all 6 of these in the round, and the issue of number 1 obviously is discounted, but that doesn't mean that the others are discounted. And I thank Councillor Nora for actually adding more information to this. So that's all I wanted to say, really. Just wanted to be very clear about the facts of the situation. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Simon. Councillor Pratt, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. This might be a strange one, but bear with me. So when it comes to recycling, now if you look at if you arrive at my house on collection day, I'm allowed 2 blue. I mean, we all know the system: 2 blue bags, the blue recycling bag, orange, and the caddy waste. Now, it's irrelevant how many people are living in my house because it's my private property, and that is what I'm allowed to give. Now, when you have a HMO, those rules still apply, or are you given? You know, if say there's a maximum of 6 people in this, are you now allowed to put out 12 bags and, you know, all sorts of different recycling? Because it is, you've got to understand, you know, this is a house, but you want to move into HMO. Where are 12 bin bags, you know, potentially to a maximum? All these caddy bins, you know, and where do they all go out on recycling day? Or is it restricted as per a private household? Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Jonathan will answer that question.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. That's a very good question you've asked. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know whether there will be 6 recycling receptacles or whether it will be done on a house or property basis. That will be a management issue really for the company that's operating the HMO. Again, it's something that we have to be mindful of in planning terms, and the policy in the LDP does suggest that would be appropriate to have recycling facilities and parking facilities and so forth. However, there is you also have to bear in mind that it's the adverse impact that we have to take into account, is whether if you can't have somewhere to put your recycling bag, what's the harm? Where's that needs to be adequately demonstrated if we're seeking to refuse consent. I need to point out to members as well that this isn't a house at the moment. This is a commercial property. This is an office which fits into B1 classification, which also includes light industry. So the lawful use of this premises at the moment is for commercial activities. It's not going from a house into a HMO. It's going from a commercial use into a residential use. There are no restrictions on the property. You could have 10 employees park in there. You could have 10 employees come in and go in 24 hours a day. That's the lawful use of this premises. It's in commercial use. It's not in residential use. If it were to be converted into a single dwelling, you'd still have the same issues. You wouldn't have a drying area. You wouldn't have adequate amenity space. You wouldn't have car parking. So it's looking at the fallback position and looking at the potential alternative uses. But at the moment, you should bear in mind this is a commercial premises, and the lawful use could be anything from a solicitor's office to a manufacturing unit. Okay, so you need to bear that in mind. Thank you, Chair. We've got a few other.
Yeah, thank you for that. Councillor John, Mark John, please.
Thank you, Chair. We are talking about land-based planning, not what it is or what it could be or anything else. We're talking about this potentially being a HMO. The only thing I'd like clarity on is I don't think I understood the response to Councillor Easterbrook's question about the proximity of one HMO to the next. I understand these are next door to each other, Chair. Thank you.
Could we clarify that for you now, Leon or Jonathan?
Yeah, there's. I do apologise, Councillor John. I thought I had answered Councillor Easterbrook's question. There's no policy impediment to having a HMO next to another HMO. That's what the 10% criteria in that policy would refer to.
Thank you for that. Councillor David Harrington, please.
Thank you, Chair. Councillor John asked the same question as I was going to ask, so I've lowered my hand. Thank you.
Thank you for that. Councillor Clark, please.
Thank you, Chair. I just wanted to come back on something that Jonathan just said about it being a commercial building. And obviously, we have to decide every application on its merits. This application is regarding a HMO. It's got nothing to do with a commercial building. And we are talking about the policy COM7, and policy COM7 states, and I'll state it again, proposals to convert an existing building into a house in multiple occupation, bed sits or other forms of shared housing will only be permitted within the defined settlement boundaries if, and the ones that I brought up, where the proposal incorporates on-site parking provision or demonstrates that it will not have an adverse effect on local parking provision. The proposal includes adequate storage for recycling refuse cycles and a closed drying area. And the proposed development will not have an unacceptable adverse impact on residential amenity. Out of 6 criteria within COM7, I have pointed out that 3 are against policy. Thank you.
Jonathan?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yes, Councillor, I was just pointing out what the lawful use of that building is. And if this application fails, then that could revert back to that B1 use. So it is material. That is a material consideration, because the fallback position is that this property could go back into commercial use. And what I'm trying to say to members is that if it does go back into commercial use, the activities associated with that use could be more than what's being proposed as a HMO. But you're quite right. The consideration today is whether it's HMO, but I have to point out to members, I'd be failing in my duty if I didn't, that this building is currently a commercial property.
Thank you for that explanation. Stephen?
Thank you, Chair. This is aimed at Jonathan Parsons, that I obviously respect your knowledge, your experience. I still don't feel that I've had a proper answer as to whether a HMO can be located next to a HMO. That yes. I would have thought that we in Bridgend would have used the same planning laws as Wrexham. And if there is a what's the word? An appeal against this, it would be done according to Welsh planning law. And as I'm looking at this document in front of me, it is saying proposed HMO with 2 distances. So that's okay. If it's next door or next door but 1, then it's not. So that's where I sort of refer to your experience. This isn't a Mickey Mouse document. This is on wrexham.gov.uk. So I'm a little confused, Chair.
Yeah, I'm a little bit confused as well, Councillor. What document are you referring to from Wrexham? Yeah, what is the document? Is it supplementary planning guidance? Is it the development plan? Yeah.
It's not a Bridgend policy, is it? It's not a Bridgend policy.
Right, I think I don't think it's legislation, it's policy advice. It's not for me to comment on Wrexham's policy. That's for Wrexham to decide on, and Bridgend has not got that policy. So the policy that we've got is in our LDP. And a matter of interest, I'm not sure if Wrexham's got an LDP at the moment because their members refuse to accept it, and it's in litigation at this stage. So I doubt if I don't think they've even got an LDP, but Bridgend does, and we've got our policy, which is highlighted on the screen at the moment. Okay. So it may be Wrexham's policy, but it's not national policy. Okay. I think that's perhaps where you're seeking clarification on.
All we could look at is what we're discussing today, and I think part of it has come up as over-intensification, and to have a HMO next to another HMO, to me just confirms that it is over-intensification. And with over-intensification comes people's, the way that they use their amenities are going to be affected, and there is that are they able to enjoy their properties when there is another HMO sort of within the area. So these are still questions. When people are talking about recycling, that's important, but I think that some of the other things that Councillor Clark have cleaned off the residents, those are actually live concerns. Thank you, Chair.
Right, okay, thanks. Councillor Pratt.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, no, I understand where Jonathan's coming from on this is commercial use at the moment. I mean, if they are making a lot of noise, there are routes you can go down, complain about that. I suppose you could throw that back at me if it was a HMO and they're making too much noise. You can phone the police and things like that. I mean, obviously, Councillor Clark is stating, and I've got no reason to disbelieve her that this is in breach of three of our policy guidance. It's you know, so that where we are. So as you know, the professionals say, what is your view if we reject this today? Your view of if an appeal comes forward, where would we be? Is this an absolute slam dunk for the appealee, or it's appellant rather, or depends where we go. I think it's worth having that view.
Okay, we'll give you that view, Jonathan.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Councillor Pratt. I think I must apologise. I think Councillor Easterbrook did ask a question earlier on when he spoke as to whether the officers have provided justification to refuse, and I believe that we have. And justification to approve. Recommendation is to approve, and I believe we've justified that in the text of the report. And I think we've also, or the case officers also commented on the reasons for refusal and what the sort of view of the planning officers is in terms of those reasons for refusal. Personally and professionally, I think we would be in a difficult position at an appeal. We'd certainly struggle with the car parking. I think that's not been evidenced that that is a significant issue within the context of this planning application. I also think that the other reasons, although they are material planning, they are related to the planning application, they are material, is whether there's enough evidence in those reasons to support the refusal. That is going to be for members to decide if they wish to go along with these reasons for refusal. I would say this is as a decision is contrary to officer advice, and it does go to an appeal. I have to say this, that if the appeal is unsuccessful, there is the risk of an award of costs. I have to say this every time. It's not me threatening or bullying, it's just pointing out fact that the authority is at risk of costs if it doesn't go our way, and those reasons cannot be substantiated. But it's a matter for members to whether they feel that the reasons are substantive enough to defend robustly on appeal. And as I said a number of times, it's to demonstrate the harm that this development would cause. And it's whether you feel as members that that harm is adequately demonstrated. In terms of the appeal itself, officers would give as much assistance as we can, as we would normally do in these cases, but we can't fight the appeal for members. We're all sort of prejudiced to that particular process. As my name is in this report somewhere, I've recommended approval, so I couldn't go along and defend that. Defend that those reasons for refusal in any subsequent inquiry or hearing. But we would assist members as much as possible on the technical aspects. But professionally, in answer to your question, I think we've put down in the report why we think those reasons would not be sustainable at appeal. But it's again, it's a member's decision. This is a democracy, and this is the purpose of having a planning committee. Thanks.
Yes.
Point of order. I'm aware that a number of members will have to leave the chamber very shortly. They listen to the debate, so I would put to the meeting that we proceed to a vote.
Hang on a second. Right, can you do? Right, can you do that then first? Then let's deal with that first.
Do forgive me, Councillor Hughes. Yeah, there was a point regarding Councillor Easterbrook. You kindly confirmed, Councillor Easterbrook, that you did not attend the original presentation by the planning officer, and although you've spoken, because you didn't hear all the evidence, unless you can confirm that you watched the online presentation and I think you've got to decide. I mean, normally and elsewhere where I've worked, you wouldn't be able to vote because you weren't present you didn't participate in the meeting. So I would put it to you that it would be preferable if you did not participate in the vote.
What I would say, if you allowed me, Chair, that if the decision, whichever way it gone, was carried at the last meeting and I was absent, then there would be no part. But I'm here today. I've spent the last over 2 hours listening to all the debates, including this one. I have played no part beforehand. I'm not predetermined, and I've listened to what Councillor Nora Clark have said, and will vote accordingly because of that. Now, if you're telling me other ways, then you are the legal officer, and I will take your recommendation.
Well, apparently, Bridgend does not have a standard protocol for this situation, but I think you've got to be satisfied in your mind that not only have you listened to the debate, but that you have, because you weren't present to hear the officer's presentation, you've got to be satisfied in your own mind that you're fully informed to be able to participate to vote. Is that reasonable?
Okay, well, based on your advice then, that I will remove myself from the vote. I'd like to think that one vote wouldn't make a huge difference, but I've certainly put my my views forward, and will take your advice and remove myself from the vote.
It's your decision.
Absolutely. Yeah, I'll do that then.
Okay, thank you for that. We want to clarify that. Right. Nora, can you move and someone second that you are voting against the officer's recommendation, just to clarify for the minutes that you still determined to do that?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, this application is against policy COM7 and is therefore out of accord with the local development plan.
Thank you.
And I propose that this application is refused.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you.
Second.
And that's for the reasons that you've stated now, isn't it? For the 3 reasons, just for accuracy of the minutes. Thank you. Right, so it's for and against then, okay? Mark, please.
Yes. For refusal with the reasons.
Yeah.
Mark Alvin, Democratic Services section. So this is for the refusal for the reasons in the report. Councillor Clark, please.
Sorry, point of order, Chair. I'm not clear what for and or against.
Can you explain, is it for or against refusal, or is it for and against the officer's recommendation?
For or against the recommendation, the officer's recommendation.
Right, okay, yep, sorry.
Not refusal, no.
Right, for or against the officer's
This
recommendation.
is for the officer's recommendation. Which is to grant, right?
Councillor Clark move to refuse.
But it's for or against, isn't it? The officer's recommendation.
Yeah, Councillor Clark moved.
So if it's moved.
Yeah. So it's
Yeah. Can we have clarification on that now? Where are we now with this?
we need to make sure we get this right, ladies and gentlemen.
So we've moved on from voting on the recommendation to, oh, forgive me. So we've moved, sorry, apologies, it wasn't working. So we've moved on from the recommendation to grant, which was considered at last committee, and you are now voting on the motion of Councillor Clark to refuse.
Right. You got that, Mark? Right. Okay, we all clear on that now?
Okay, Councillor Clark then, please.
I am voting for refusal.
Councillor Collins. Councillor Collins, please. Come back.
I'm voting for refusal.
Thank you. Councillor Granville.
Against.
Councillor Heather Griffiths. Councillor Simon Griffiths.
Against.
Councillor Harrison.
Against.
Councillor Martin Hughes.
Against.
Councillor Della Hughes.
For refusal.
Councillor John.
For the refusal.
Councillor Kern.
Against refusal.
Councillor Kendall.
Against.
Councillor Pratt.
For refusal.
Councillor Wathen.
For refusal.
Councillor Will.
Mark, hang on a second.
Sorry, please can I just clarify, in the previous meeting, Councillor Wathen, from memory, he didn't...
Councillor Williams.
Sorry, forgive me.
Right, okay.
Yeah.
Mark.
Very rubbish.
Can I just clarify? Councillor Williams declared a personal interest, but he decided that he didn't want to vote. Is that correct, please?
I'm not voting for this at all, as I've declared an interest. Okay.
Thank you.
Right, thank you. That was Councillor Williamson. Thank you. Sorry.
It's 6 for refusal, 7 against.
It's 6. Sorry, it's 6 for refusal and 7 against. So the yes. So to clarify.
Right, just to clarify, that's approved for the original recommendation.
Did Councillor Kendall vote then? Did everybody vote? Oh,
Yeah. Can you, Mark, just for clarity, can you read out again the names for and against, please?
Yep. Councillor Clark for, Councillor Collins for, Councillor Granville against, Councillor Heather Griffiths against, Councillor Simon Griffiths against, Councillor Harrison against, Councillor Martin Hughes against, Councillor Della Hughes for, Councillor John for, Councillor Kern against, Councillor Kendall against, Councillor Pratt 4, Councillor Wathen 4. I make that 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Against 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Everybody happy with that? It's just been read out. Okay, that was democratic. Okay, so the original is for the officer's recommendation then. Okay. Okay, let's move on then, after that lengthy debate on that one. Right, number 12, appeals. Has anybody got anything they want to discuss on appeals? Because I don't want to go through them. Obviously, people should have read them, and if they got any points, they can raise them.
No.
No? Okay. Training log is the same as it was
We've got training next week.
Oh, we've got training next week, which is important. 11:30 on the 15th in the chamber. Okay.
Sorry, Chair, can I just confirm that was confirmed to be as hybrid, that one, only because if I had to come in, go home and come back.
Right, okay.
So
I think it is hybrid. It is hybrid. Yes, you're quite right. Yes, it is hybrid. Sorry. Yes. Right. Number 14, urgent items. I haven't been given any urgent items from officers or members. So can I thank everybody for attending today for this meeting, a long meeting, but it was necessary. Thank everybody for attending. Safe journey home, everybody.